Called The Key to the Gate of Dreams, Searching for Utopia in H.P. Lovecraft's Dreamlands. I begin. Wars supposedly go through a circle of life, death, and rebirth, while events of an apocalyptic scale occur between the transitions. The big picture is that the cosmos itself is unaffected. But what about mankind's place in the cosmos? One of the most honest responses to the question of what we are comes from a Lovecraft story entitled Facts Concerning the Late Arthur Jermyn and His Family. In the story, the narrator declares, "If we knew what we are, we should do as Sir Arthur Jermyn did, and Arthur Jermyn soaked himself in oil and set fire to his clothing one night." There's not much hope of a utopia here if the nature of humankind is so horrible that it is a dystopia in itself. This paper focuses on the ideas of Howard Phillips Lovecraft, whose cosmic horror stories deal with the dystopian nature of the indifferent universe and the insignificance of man. Though he used such ideas as an inspiration for horror stories, and though these stories did reflect a negative philosophy, Lovecraft did not consider himself a pessimist. He writes in a letter to James F. Moulton, "Contrary to what you may assume, I am not a pessimist, but an indifferentist. Pessimists are just as illogical as optimists. Both schools retain in a vestigial way the primitive concept of a conscious teleology, of a cosmos which gives a damn, one way or the other, about the especial wants and ultimate warfare or welfare of mosquitoes, rats, lice, dogs, men, horses, pterodactyls, trees, fungi, dodos, or other forms of biological energy." That the Lovecraftian cosmos doesn't give a damn about the various forms of biological energy doesn't mean it cares about anything else or that it feels anything at all. In fact, it is undoubtedly and absolutely impersonal, something which Lovecraft verifies in a letter to Robert D. Howard. Lovecraft says, "It is damned unlikely that anything like a central cosmic will, a spirit world, or an eternal survival of personality exists." So far, I have only quoted the writer himself in order to present a complete picture of his cosmology. But the major question I will deal with in this paper is, what kind of utopia could be possible in a cosmos that is dystopia? In the first part of my paper, I will argue that in all its pessimism, or indifferentism if you like, and despair that its cosmos creates to its characters, the Lovecraftian fiction includes the most powerful utopian desire, and even the relief of a satisfied utopian hope, the vision of the paradise, unearthly and yet realizable. In his 1965 book, The History of Utopian Thought, Dr. Joyce Oremer Hertzberg writes that utopia is not a social state, it is a state of mind. I will proceed to examine the Lovecraftian concept of the utopian state of mind and its place in the dystopian cosmos. According to a Lovecraft story, when Randolph Carter was 30, he lost the key of the Gate of Dreams. Prior to that time, he had made up for the prosiness of life by nightly excursions to strange and ancient cities beyond space and lovely, unbelievable garden lands across ethereal seas. This passage is from The Silver Key, which is part of Lovecraft's Dream Circle. Here, Lovecraft clearly describes the situation of lucid dreaming, since his character, Randolph Carter, seems to be able to travel within dreams at his own will, fully aware that he is dreaming. According to the Lucidity Institute, founded in 1987 by Dr. Stephen LaBerge, lucid dreaming means dreaming while knowing that you are dreaming. The term was coined by Frederick Van Eden, who used the word lucid in the sense of mental clarity. A comparison can be drawn here between the dream narrative of H.P. Lovecraft and the supposedly non-fiction writing on the art of dreams by anthropologist and practitioner of shamanism Carlos Castaneda. In his 1993 book on the subject, The Art of Dreaming, he describes his experiences in the dream world. The two major similarities in Lovecraft's and Castaneda's narration of the practice of the lucid dreams are the gates between dream dimensions and the guides that help the dreamers in their quest. In Through the Gates of the Silver Key, which Lovecraft co-authored with his friend E. Hoffman Price as a sequel to the Silver Key, Randolph Carter encounters in his dreams a guide. According to the narrator, the guide had been an entity of Earth millions of years before, when man was undreamed of and when forgotten shapes moved on a steaming planet, building strange cities among whose last crumbling ruins the first mammals were to play. We later learned this guide is none other than the outer god Yog-Sothoth, the Beyond One, best described in Lovecraft's The Dunwich Horror thus: Yog-Sothoth knows the gate, Yog-Sothoth is the gate, Yog-Sothoth is the key and the guardian of the gate. Past, present, future, all are one in Yog-Sothoth. In Castaneda's The Art of Dreaming, the guide, here referred to as the scout and the dreaming emissary, is, according to the Saman master Don Juan, alien energy that has consciousness, alien energy that purports to aid dreamers by telling them things. What follows is an example of what the emissary is telling the dreamers. During one of his encounters with the narrator, the emissary explains, "Dreaming is the vehicle that brings dreamers to this world. Our world is connected to yours by a door called dreams. We know how to go through that door, but men don't. They have to learn it." So here we have again the symbol of the gate. In Castaneda's Dreamland, as in Lovecraft's, there are a number of gates, each representing a level of dream reality. In Castaneda's work, for example, Don Juan explains that upon crossing the first or second gate of dreaming, dreamers reach a threshold of energy and begin to see things or to hear voices. This is where the narrator encounters the emissary, who is able to lead him to higher levels of other dimensional existence. In the Lovecraftian Through the Gates of the Silver Key, we read that within Carter's dreams, a gate had been unlocked. Not indeed the ultimate gate, but one leading from earth and time to that extension of earth which is outside time, and from which in turn the ultimate gate leads fearsomely and perilously to that last void which is outside all earths, all universes, and all matter. But what is exactly that Carter achieved when finally he floated forward and through the ultimate gate? In other words, what is it that Lovecraft's characters find in the dreams? In the source story Celefes, we see an optimism that's almost extinct from the rest of his work. The story begins with the phrase, "In a dream, Uranus saw the city." Needless to say, the city here is the character's utopia, a utopia he can find only in the Dreamlands. As the narrator notes, the more he withdrew from the world about him, the more wonderful became his dreams. In the end, Uranus ends up existing exclusively in the dream and no longer returns to his earthly life, so that though his physical body dies, he still reigns over the city of his dreams. What is the allegory here? The Lovecraftian dream city doesn't seem to have a political symbolism, but rather an aesthetical and of course an existential one. The utopian experience his characters have in the dreams varies, but it bears in all cases the sense of a superhuman achievement of transcendence. In Celefes, Uranus creates with his mind his own other dimensional utopia, while in Through the Gates of the Silver Key, Randolph Carter experiences absolute universal knowledge. Lovecraft writes, "Now there was no distinction between boy and man. There was only the entity, Randolph Carter," and goes on to describe even greater revelations, such as no death, no doom, no anguish can arouse the surpassing despair which flows from a loss of identity. Merging with nothingness is peaceful oblivion. But to be aware of existence and yet to know that one is no longer a definite being, distinguished from other beings, that one no longer has a self, that is the nameless summit of agony and dread. This most horrible knowledge, which in other Lovecraft stories is the source of terror, becomes Lovecraft's most personal utopia in his post-poem Ex Oblivione. Here Lovecraft presents his utopian vision as utopia in its literal sense. No place, nothingness. This means more to him than simply a theme in his fiction. In a 1930 letter to his friend Auguste Deblet, Lovecraft writes that time, space, and natural law hold for me suggestions of intolerable bondage, and I can form no picture of emotional satisfaction which does not involve their defeat, especially the defeat of time, so that one may merge oneself with the whole historic stream and be wholly emancipated from the transient and the ephemeral. In his dark utopian vision of Ex Oblivione, a work that was probably influenced by Lovecraft's reading of Schopenhauer at this time, according to scholars S.D. Joshi and David Schultz, Lovecraft's narrator declares that, "As the gate swung wider and the dream pushed me through, I knew that all sights and glories were at an end. For in that new realm was neither land nor sea, but only the wide void of unpeopled and illimitable space. So happier than I had ever dared hope to be, I dissolved again into that native infinity of crystal oblivion from which the daemon life had called me for one brief desolate hour." What Lovecraft describes here as the absolute utopia is what other people would see as mankind's greatest fear, that this non-existence and permanent oblivion is the wishland, is not much different in its essence from the Buddhist concept of nirvana. Discussing Buddhist utopia, Stephen Collins refers to Haldane, who argues there is a conventional metaphor that defines existential conditions as places. Besides, Collins argues that nirvana is assimilated to other Buddhist utopias through the image of it as a city. Therefore, can we not argue that the cities in the Lovecraftian Dreamlands actually symbolize existential conditions, yet that they are utopias nonetheless, as is, in Lovecraft's view, the native infinity of crystal oblivion, which he describes as the ultimate utopia in Ex Oblivione? And isn't this darkest of utopian visions a nirvana? Indeed, like the American Buddha that he is, Lovecraft dreams of escaping from the samsara, or the circle of life, or the eternal return, if you prefer, and finds refuge into the lifeless, white void of unpeopled and illimitable space. This utopia that he proposes is, I argue, the only possible one if we accept his interpretation of the universe as what he calls it in the Silver Key, a blindly impersonal cosmos. One final point to be made about the nature of Lovecraft's utopianism is under which conditions and terms the idea of a Dreamlands can be acceptable as a utopia. In his book Lucid Dreaming, Laverts argues that according to the traditional psychology of Tibetan Buddhism, all of our experiences are subjective and thus, by their very nature, not in substance different from what we call dreams. This is also the point of view of the cognitive psychology of the modern West. Granting this premise, and scientifically speaking it's impossible to argue with it, it would be difficult to name any experience that was not a sort of dream. Lovecraft, of course, would agree. In the Silver Key, he writes, "All life is only a set of pictures in the brain, among which there is no difference betwixt those born of real things and those born of inward dreamings, and no cause to value the one above the other." Yet his main character in the Silver Key confesses that he prefers dream illusions to the illusions of our physical creation. To complete the picture, whether in the form of a utopian dreamlike city or the peaceful oblivion of the bottomless abyss, in the Lovecraftian godless universe, there is no possibility of a utopia on Earth, and the only utopianism possible requires that reality versus illusion be treated as a false dilemma. Conclusion. If the answer to the question what we are is that we are accidents of a chaotic universe, then indeed our place in the cosmos is such that, as the Lovecraftian narrator proposes, if we knew what we are, we should do as Sir Arthur Jermyn did, and Arthur Jermyn soaked himself in oil and set fire to his clothing in the night. However, as I've argued earlier, the Lovecraftian universe does offer the relief of the utopian hope, the vision of the paradise, unearthly yet realizable. This perfectly realizable paradise is permanent nothingness, or nirvana, or the atheist utopia, if you like. The relief is the peaceful oblivion, the way can be suicide, which many of Lovecraft's characters choose over dealing with the intolerable truth, and of course the alternative minor utopias that the dream cycle suggests, the Dreamlands, which are, as both the narrator and the writer behind him admit, pure illusions. Whether these dream illusions are preferable to life's illusions or not, and I imagine the selection is based on which kind of illusion one feels more comfortable with, it doesn't provide, in my opinion, a sufficient excuse for the resort to either. The logical conclusion from all this is that an atheist utopia, whether a literal one or an allegorical one as an utopian tradition of being, is not possible unless in the form of an illusion. In fact, in a meaningless cosmos, there indeed can be no distinction between reality and illusion, and even if there could, it wouldn't make any difference in the long run. Here is then the Lovecraftian dilemma, good illusion or bad illusion, the second being the ugly reality. In either case, it is still illusion. So if we accept the Lovecraftian version of the universe that is an accidental, random, godless, meaningless, universal dystopia of chaos, then whether a utopia can truly exist outside the mind is, I believe, the first question one must ask before even considering what that utopia would be like, how it would be achieved, and so on. Thank you.